I got in trouble. In the middle of this train, there was a pink, not a love bug, but one of those vans, the old fashioned, like what surfers used to use.
Uh-huh.
I took a picture of it. The train stopped. Somebody got off. They took my camera, took out the film, and handed the camera back to me. And I'm like, oh boy, that could have been an international incident. But I thought it was the funniest thing to see a pink Volkswagen wagon or Volkswagen in the middle of all these tanks and everything else. So.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where we believe living with intention through a bucket list lifestyle is a great way to bring yourself personal joy. As you are crossing items off your list, you're actually filling up your bucket. The more items you cross off, the more joy gets added, until eventually your joy spills over into the lives of those around you. Now let's start crossing it off together. When you look at your list, how much of it is stuff that's important to you, or is it things that you've seen on Instagram? When you set up your list to be about your list and no one else's, that's when you can have the most impact on yourself. Our bucket list storyteller today created a list that reflected her needs, her wants, her desires, and the joy that she wanted to get back out of the world. And when she did this, she was able to overcome some pretty major obstacles to crossing those things off. When the adversity came, she was able to conquer it because the items on her list were her passions. Let's learn more about her story and start crossing it off. I'd like to introduce you to today's bucket list storyteller. Her name is Sally Gimon, and she describes herself as a real estate investor and someone that loves helping people save money on their taxes. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roger, for having me. I appreciate this. I'd love to talk about travel.
Awesome. So tell us, what is the thing that you crossed off your bucket list?
I crossed off the Trans-Siberian Railway from Moscow to Beijing. It was amazing.
That is awesome. So is that normally where it starts? Tell people a little bit about the Trans-Siberian Railroad and kind of history.
There's two different directions, Moscow to Beijing or Moscow to Vladivostok. And then you can do it backwards from Beijing to Moscow or from Vladivostok back to Moscow. I was in Eastern Europe, and so that's why I went from Russia to Beijing, because I wanted to see the Great Wall of China at the same time.
How long is that trip? Does that take?
7 days.
A week. So that's not too bad. That's not. And do you have a sleeper car in there? I mean, is it?
Correct. I was traveling on my own. I got in the middle of a Norwegian travel group. There were three Norwegian friends who were traveling. So I was the fourth person and there were four of us in a sleeping car, if that makes sense.
And when you're riding the train, can you see stuff, or is it very limited? Or
you have the windows. This was back in '93, so it might have changed. But they don't have like an observation deck like Amtrak has. Mm-hmm. But you can stand at the end of the train. You can look out the windows. I mean, going through Mongolia and through the desert. I grew up in Phoenix. That desert's completely different than the desert I know.
Yes, for sure. So Sally, tell us, why did this come up onto your bucket list? Why did this thing, did you want to make it happen?
When I was young, the summer I turned 7 to 8, we took a train ride from, from Edinburgh down to London. It was the first time I ever was on a train, and I loved it. And I don't know where I learned about Lake Baikal being the largest fresh body water. It was always on my bucket list. And when I got assigned to to Poland with the Peace Corps, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. When my 2 years are over, I'm going on the Trans-Siberian.
And so when you're riding for ththose 7 days, you have stops? I mean, do they have long stops?
It was very interesting. They do pull over, to the larger cities. When I was living in Poland, I traveled by train quite a bit. And when you come up to a train stop, people would be selling hard-boiled eggs. People would be selling pierogies. Again, this is 1993 in Russia, and there was nobody being industrious, selling any food. And thank God I got involved with the Norwegian group, because they said I had to pay 22 American dollars to get on the food plan on the train. I don't know if you know this part of the story. 6 hours before I got on the train, everything I had was stolen out of my locker at the trains, in the lockers at the train station, and all my food. I had like canned food, I had candy bars, things. So thank God I found people. We had caviar, we had bread. I mean, we had amazing food for the $22.
That's good that you were able to accomplish that. How did you keep? I have to ask, all your stuff stolen. and you don't have anything, but you still get on the train. What was that feeling like? I mean, were you just so determined that you were going to do it, or that it was c'est la vie? What were you thinking at that time when you said, "Okay, I'm
this,
just going
this,
to go through
this
with
is a
this"?
funny story. My family's like, you shouldn't have done it. You know, when you have a premonition that something's wrong. So I
Mm.
went back to the train station, and I didn't know, they call them the woman who you give the coins to get the little locker. She has a key to open all 12 lockers at the same time. So I had a little gym bag with my camera, my passport, my money, a change of underwear, and a change of t-shirts. No short, just the shorts I was wearing. The lady who was running it talked to the police officer. He walked me across this humongous train station in Moscow to call the U.S. embassy. An attache came to pick me up. They took me back to the embassy. They had me look through mug shots, and I picked out two guys who were working in the aisle of the locker room, who
Hmm.
were Russian mafia. And they're like, "You have to go back to the United States today." I'm like, "No, I have a ticket for the Trans-Siberian Railway." So they let me call. The only my I lost my address book, so the only number I knew was my brother's number. He had lived in the house for 15 years. I called the number at 2 o'clock in the morning, saying, "Hey, I just had everything stolen the Trans-Siberian. I picked out Russian mafia. I'm going to Moscow. I'm going to Beijing." And the attaché gave me a letter to call back, when I get to Beijing, to call my brother to say I got there okay. The train pulled out of the station, and 3 blocks away, I literally am running after the train as fast as I could to jump onto the end of the train because they were afraid that, I don't look Russian, and the Russian mafia knew I was an American and they stole my things. The gentleman from the embassy thought it was extremely dangerous. I'm like, I've been traveling for 2 years now. I'm
Yeah,
going. I want to be on it.
a lot of determination there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the train itself. Like
Mhm.
many of us have like this impression that we get from Agatha Christie novels and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff of what this looks like. Describe the actual train and what your setting was when you're inside the train.
It was nothing fancy. It was like a foam bed, bunk beds. So two on this side, two on that side. You could put up the top bunk bed so you can sit like on a couch in between.
Hmm.
One thing I did have, thank God, was I had a deck of cards. The three Norwegians I was traveling with, they had nothing to do, so I taught them a game called 31. We played poker. I mean, we did a lot. My biggest problem on the train, I was reading a book that only had 30 pages left, and I had two more books in my backpack. I don't know
uh
about you, Roger, but reading the same book over and over again, that gets really boring.
Depends on the book, but yeah, yeah, I imagine after a couple of days that would be. And
Correct.
so you had a sleeping car, and you hung out with your new Norwegian friends. The
Correct.
dining,
And there was a dining car. We had to go two cars up to the dining car, but the two cars we passed through were all set up the same way, four bunk beds. Some cars had six people in them. I don't know how they slept. Narrow. I mean, very, very narrow that,
yeah,
if you're, I'm a restless sleeper. So I had the top bunk, and you could put up a rail so you didn't fall out. I had to put that up.
and the food. I mean, was it as elegant as what we see in the movies, or
Again, this was back in 93. It was what you expect. I lived in Poland for 2 years. It was a regular train. It wasn't elegant. My parents went on the Orient Express, and my dad loved it. I mean, my dad talked how elegant it was. What I did, and my parents actually went on the Trans-Siberian 4 years after I did. And my dad was the right. My dad agreed with me. He goes, "It's not elegant. It's just functional, if that makes sense."
yeah, sure. And I asked if it stopped. Were you able to like get out, stretch your legs, go visit stuff? I mean, was it kind of
Some of
touristy, or was it just
some
Bayer
of the
train
places,
station?
they where they were changing things, they would give us, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So like in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, I purposely got off and I walked one way and then went down another block and walked back just to say I've been in Ulaanbaatar to see what the
Mm,
city looked like. The longest stop was when we were coming into China. They had to change the wheels on the train. They literally shifted it because the Russian trains are in very narrow gauges. The
yes.
Chinese trains are the much wider changes. So that was like at 1 o'clock in the morning to like 3:30 in the morning, and they woke you up and said, "Get off the train," and you're like, "Oh, you're tired and
Wow.
you're sitting in it." there was nothing in the train station where they were doing this. There was no vending machines. There was nobody selling anything. We all just slept on the benches that we were waiting for the train to get the wheels fixed on it.
Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show. So when you get to Beijing and you're done with these 7 days, so looking back at it, was it worth it? Was it
I loved it. I
okay.
loved it. Lake Baikal was incredible. We just out of Novosibirsk, we got pulled over and we had to wait 2 hours while this amazing train went past us with tanks, with military, everything else. One of the Norwegians I was with was a sergeant in the Norwegian army, and as soon as we got to Beijing, he had to go to the Norwegian embassy because he was counting exactly how many tanks. It was they did insurgents. I want to say it was August 6th of 2000 of 1993. It was Siberian army was going into Moscow to do the insurgents. So I mean, I was living in the middle of history, if that makes sense. It was
Yeah.
just I got in trouble in the middle of this train. There was a pink, not a love bug, but one of those vans, the old fashioned, like what surfers used to use.
Uh-huh.
I took a picture of it. The train stopped. Somebody got off. They took my camera, took out the film, and handed the camera back to me. And I'm like, oh boy, I could have got that. Could have been an international incident, but I thought it was the funniest thing to see a pink Volkswagen wagon or Volkswagen in the middle of all these tanks and everything else. So that
Oh, you were taking pictures of the other train.
correct, correct.
Okay. So they wanted to
They
sign.
had soldiers on each of the train cars that were going by. So one of the soldiers saw me take the picture, and that huge long train slowed down. The soldier jumped off, and we didn't know what was going on because they had AK-47s, and he takes the camera from me and just rips the film out. I'm like, okay, I guess I will have a picture of the pink Volkswagen in the middle of pigs. Who I don't know why they would have that in the middle of a military convoy, if that makes sense. It was just a
Yeah.
funny thing to look at.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure somebody was greasing the wheels to get something that they wanted there. I'm sure.
Exactly. It was probably some general's personal vehicle or something.
Yeah, no doubt. So, Sally, what's something that if you were in a conversation with somebody at a Starbucks and they said, "Oh, I've always thought about doing that," and you were sharing this story, what are some of the things that you would recommend to them to do to like get the most out of the experience?
I would say have small bills, like dollar bills, have something to trade, maybe fancy pens or something like that. Because especially in Ulaanbaatar, there were kids all over they wanted things from you when I left the train station, just a lot of kids. Unfortunately, I had little gifts to give to people, because I was told about that, but it's relaxing. It's you see so much different topography as you go along. I mean, Lake Baikal, we were just at the edge of Lake Baikal, how it goes over, and this lake. I, I don't know if you've traveled to Israel and Jordan, but Sea of Galilee is a little tiny lake. Lake
Mhm.
Baikal looked like it was an ocean. How big it was! Ulaanbaatar was interesting. Going through the desert. I mean, the whole experience was just do it. Just go get on it and do it. I maybe it's gotten fancier since I did it, but I'm so glad I took the time to travel on it and to just have that experience. It was an amazing experience to have.
Awesome. And looking back at it now, is there something that happened or something that clicked in you that made some kind of transformation in you from crossing that item off? Was there something that changed inside Sally?
It's funny because when I saw your post about crossing things off your bucket list, I always have 10 things on the bucket list. So when that got
Okay.
crossed off, Machu Picchu's on there. I'm a scuba diver, so I need to go to the Galapagos Islands. There's places I want to scuba dive. So I do have a top 10, and my COVID stopped it, but every year I cross at least one thing off my top 10 list.
And when you do that, what's the benefit that you get out of having that list and crossing those items off?
I honestly feel we need to know every to travel someplace to learn about a culture. Like I had spent 4 days in St. Petersburg, and I spent 3 days in Moscow just to learn something about another culture. The joke was at the time I'm in Russia. My younger brother was applying to be a Secret Service agent, and there was a question about, is anybody in your family a communist? And my brother's like, my sister's in Russia, so he still got the job, but it just to see something new, to do something new. Roger, I don't mean to make fun of somebody, but I got set up on a blind date when I was living in Massachusetts, and literally where I lived in Massachusetts, it was 10 miles to New Hampshire to the Mall of New Hampshire where it's tax free. The guy I got set up with thought it was a badge of honor that he's never left the state of Massachusetts, and I'm like, oh boy, we're nothing alike. I'll
Yeah.
finish this blind date and we're done. So
Yeah, I totally understand that. You got to have some kind of connection with those that you're looking at spending more time with. And if they're not into travel and you are, that could be definitely a problem.
we kidnapped my when my youngest nephew graduated from high school. I kidnapped my two nephews, and I took them to the Outer Banks, and I signed them up for a Discover scuba diving trip because I love to scuba dive. And now my two nephews are scuba divers too, because it's just a different experience. If you haven't tried it, try something new.
Yeah, it's important, especially when you're putting your list together. I think it's good to put things on there that push your boundaries and push your push your mindset a little bit. That's a good thing.
Exactly. If you don't mind my asking, Roger, what's your number one on your list?
So I have 106 episodes and I've only ever done 2 episodes of things that I've crossed off. So it's not trying to make it less about me as much as possible. I'm not I don't do this for to instill FOMO in people. I do this to inspire and encourage and empower people to cross stuff off their list. So
But at least you have a list.
oh yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh yeah. 95% of people in America would say they have one, but only 40% have it written down and are doing anything
Yes,
about it. So that's
exactly.
also part of the reason why I do this is I want to encourage more people to actually write their list down. So I'm actually going to ask you the question because that's the thing. So Sally, what's something else that's on your bucket list that you want to cross off that you're thinking
My
about
number one
doing?
but my number one bucket list. I really messed up my back a few years ago, so I don't think I can do the 6 mile 6 day hike into Machu Picchu. But I do want to take the train. I might be pronouncing it wrong. Carousel into Machu Picchu, where you can stay overnight.
Hmm.
That to me would be amazing. My father did that after my mom died, and he just said it was most. He sat on thousand-year-old ruins with nobody around, and just he was an artist, and he was drawing all the pictures, and he said it was the most amazing time he spent in Machu Picchu after the crowds had left.
So I have to ask you because I've heard you say it a couple times during the interview. Your parents seem like pretty open, adventurous type people. How did that
Yes,
impact you growing up?
my mom was from very rural Ireland, a small town in Donegal. She left Ireland at 16 to go to London to become a nurse. She had never seen electricity until she got to London. She
Wow.
was working her way around the world. She wanted to get to Australia and fly with the Outback flying doctors. This was back in the 60s, but because she was Irish, she couldn't work in a federal hospitals. So they sent her up to a small town in Alaska, Bethel, Alaska. That's where she met my dad. And as kids, we had a pop-up trailer, and my father worked for the Indian Health Service. So he would go someplace to be the pharmacist for 2 weeks while the pharmacist went on vacation. So, we traveled all over the Western United States. They installed the love of travel for me. I have two brothers. One brother does a lot of traveling. My other brother does nothing. The one with the two nephews, they don't do anything. I don't know where he lost the bug.
Yeah, we're all different for sure. Uh,
Exactly.
but that's amazing that you had parents that were, willing to. I because I did not. My parents, I think my parents, the wildest travel I ever saw them do up until my 20s was go to Hawaii, right? And they did tons of traveling after that. But growing up, my formative years, I did not have a lot of people around me that did travel. So it was something that was exciting for me, and I had a lot of wanderlust. So I wish somebody had been more
But you're
supportive of
doing it.
that. Yeah. Oh, sure.
Well, the joke in my family, my birthday's in the third week of August, and I have had some of the most amazing birthdays in different places in the world.
Mm,
And everyone, I still to this day will go someplace for my birthday, someplace different, so I can say I've been, keep doing that because the year I turned 16, we were in Yellowstone National Park and we were on a hike, and there was like it felt not an earthquake, but the earth was shaking, and the park ranger's like, run. So we're all running as fast as we could. And a geyser that hadn't gone off in like, I don't know, 1,000 years went off. My dad's dream was to see Old Faithful. So we went to go see Old Faithful. I'm like, this is boring. The other geyser was so much better. But I mean, it happened on my birthday, and I'm like, what a birthday present.
that's amazing. Sally, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you telling your stories. That's
I
awesome.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Where can folks find you online, and what do you do there?
I am a real estate investor, and I help 1099 income earners save on federal taxes, 70% on their paychecks on federal taxes, and investors save for capital gains, interest income, dividend income, rental income, and royalties. The reason I do this is so I can go on my fantastic vacations where I
Mhm.
want to. And the website is thetrustisisyou.com, and my podcast is Stop Paying Capital Gains Now with an exclamation mark. I appreciate you having me, Roger, because my family does, we don't talk much about traveling right now, and because COVID, and I want that to change now.
I heard it called revenge travel the other day. That people are have been so pent up for so long that now everyone's out there doing it. So, Sally, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you get the chance to do the Machu Picchu trip. If there's anything
I
I can do to help you make that happen, for sure, let me know. It tends to be a lot of people's lists, and I'm sure it'll be
Yes,
a great experience. And once you get it done, let me know, and we'll have you back.
excellent. Thank you, Roger. I hope you have a wonderful summer then.